Hi, good afternoon. The Jews, it's a good Arab Shabbos, evening Arab Shabbos coming up. And presentation for today will be called Our Navy, which is the Ark of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, and Noah's Ark. And I picked the aquatic theme. You'll see why in a little bit. Okay, going forward, so have our morning meeting, which concerns basically the saying that Ein od milvado. We're here because of God, and there's nothing outside of God, and that's what generates these sessions. The second part is recognizing that everything is under the control of God, or God's awareness. And further with that, we have a saying that says, "Chutz Yerushalayim," which means everything is under the control of God except our willingness to follow His rules and commandments for the benefit of ourselves and the world, and which constitutes and performs self-sacrifice. The person puts his will aside for God's will. One encompassing addition to that is, which I've mentioned before, that we are here in order to fulfill God's will, but also to make this world, or in conjunction with that, making this world a dwelling place for God, where God is recognized by all people and all in the world. And going forward now, so our rebbeim, these are rabbis in Pacific dynasties, and also teachers from the Orthodox, have oftentimes made additions in the application of Torah concepts or Torah learning passages or holidays and the like. So I'll go on to mention a couple of those. One happens to be related to the Passover Seder. That means the ritual meal. And one of the phases of that is where a father is sitting with his four sons, and at the time, which is emphasis of teaching your children, especially about the exodus of Egypt and everything involved with that. So you have four sons. So it describes. By the way, Torah doesn't repeat things for no reason. It's just to duplicate, but it's either an increase in emphasis or is something new to be learned. So we have four sons. So why four? Mentioned now is because each one asks a question in different ways. One is a wise son who really is inquiring and wants to find out really what's going on with the holiday and how to fulfill it properly. The other one is called a wicked son. We don't want to cast that name on him, that brand, but he's more cynical about things and is trying to maybe find a way to refute things and the concepts. And going forward is the son who's very simple in his perception of things. So his questions are very basic. And by the way, each answer is projected and by the father, and it's put into we call the Haggadah, the book of this story. I'm not going to go into the depths of each answer. And the final son is one who is not able to ask a question, whatever the reason, his age or um, some other maybe holding him back. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, the Lubavitch, has added a fifth son even now. Remember, he's not changing the mitzvah of teaching your children. He's just expanding the range, how to use it. So the fifth son is the son who, unfortunately, is not at the Pesach Seder table, not at the Passover table of the family, and celebrating and learning about the holidays. And God willing, all these sons will come back and take care of that. So going forward, another area where um, we find the Rebbeim expanding things is a passage which comes from the Talmud. It says, in every generation, every person is obligated to discuss and delve into the, the subject of the going out of Mitzrayim, going out of Egypt, the Exodus, redemption. And the Rebbe has the Alter Rebbe, or the first Rebbe of Lubavitch, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Lidi, who added to that, again, expanded it, saying not only hold door to door every generation, but every day. Every day we have to look at ourselves as if we have come out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, which has multiple ramifications, um, including that some things are our own slavery to ourselves or to the society. Going forward now, the Pesach Sheini is a holiday which is occurring today. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to get done today. Discuss an aspect of Passover, called Passover, the second Passover, and that was instituted by Hashem via the request of Moshe, via the request of some of the Jewish community who were not able to offer the Passover sacrifice, the Paschal lamb, at its appointed time. And for them, it was a very good reason. And they were involved in something very important. And they didn't really do anything wrong. Actually, they were ultimately doing something very good. But the Rebbe expanded it, and our teachers expanded this, that this is a time where a person, if he couldn't get it right the first time, or whatever the reason, that he has another chance. So there's always a chance to correct your ways. And that's despite what one might think of themselves, of their own character, or what they have done, whether they feel that they've thrown up a stone wall to any chance to come back to Hashem. But God is merciful, loving, loving kindness and forgiveness, and it's an essential part of God. So a person should know, and Shani, second Passover, is also learn to provide that venue, give the template for that. So I'd like to add to that, if possible, probably it's nothing new, but for myself, that with the second Passover, that we also have a chance to revisit the first Passover and all the things that involved with that scenario, up to and even including and even beyond the parting of the Red Sea, what you call Kriyas Yam Suf. You might hear me say that word. It's the splitting of the Red Sea. And there we had the Jewish people had a tremendous dilemma. The Egyptians had decided they wanted to bring the Jews back despite everything that happened to them. And they came after with the Jews who were at the Red Sea. They couldn't go any further because of the sea. And they kept with a trained army, well-equipped army, with a strong intent to get them back. So it was deduced that there were a few alternatives the Jews had to select from how to handle the situation. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I'll present three. One is to give up and go back to slavery, which was anything but pleasant to think about. It was a brutal slavery, and it's often described that way. More than brutal, even cruel and heartless. The second thing was to fight. Well, here we have people who were enslaved for many, many thousands of years, hundreds of years, and not trained in war at all, uh, coming against a very skillful and powerful army, and not really much of an alternative. One other was to pray to God, and the prayer is the Jewish way. There's a term called a call Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esau. So Jacob turned to God with prayer, learning, and that was our way. So they went to Moshe, said, "It's not time to pray." And Moses approached Hashem with that proposition. And what did Hashem say? Like, I'm glad they finally came to me. I'm glad they understood who I am. He said, I already gave you the solution for this problem at the beginning of the Exodus. And if you forgot it, you're not following it. And that is to go leave the land of Egypt and go to Mount Sinai, Har Sinai, to receive the Torah and become uh, God's children, people, servants, all the above. But what about the Yom Suf, the Red Sea? So remember, this is God, and He's the one that created everything and keeps everything in creation. So I'm sure He didn't forget that point. So He said, "I told you to go forward," and they did. Long story short, there's much involved with that, despite this briefness in the Torah literature or in the Torah itself in the script. They went through, and this was a tremendous redemption, saving from the Egyptian. And this is one of the tremendous miracles that occurred to the Jews in Egypt. So I'm going to focus on that miracle, going across the Red Sea, and what I just presented about it. And that's why I have the ark, the water theme. So the Rebbe, has addressed this situation in our times when we've been faced with very difficult, very dangerous situations. And therefore, what has the Rebbe's advice been? Of course, to pray to God, but also he has given us directives which are very, very tangible. And this matter, I would try to interject it in the early 90s, in 1991, we call it Nun Base, that the Rebbe, because that made a tremendously um, significant presentation to his Hasidim, his followers, at a Farbrengen or a gathering. And he says, I've done everything I can do to bring the redemption. Now I'm leaving it up to you to finish it. So we'll transpose that into our era now. Again, what we're facing was being faced by the Jewish people. And one could think, well, what was the Rebbe? Oh, one has thought there were plenty of meetings and gatherings and get-togethers and writings as what was the Rebbe implying. I don't know if one thing was specifically pointed out as the directive. Many things the Rebbe has asked for over the generation. But one thing the Rebbe had directed, and that was in this very much so in the 70s and the 80s, as to bringing out, publicizing, explaining, and spreading the concept of the 7 mitzvahs of the children of Noah. Now, how can I take that point and extrapolate it or moving into this era that, the often discussed, and justly so, real dilemma is anti-Semitism, and it's presented quite often and described quite well. But it's recognized that anti-Semitism is at times a smokescreen for evil people in the world who want to dominate the world and subjugate the world. And as a result, people other than the Jews suffer as well. You can look at the history books and find the nations where the oppression or the persecution of the Jews were so strong, and see what happened to the other people of those nations. And this is in many eras, in many locations. So in Isaiah, you'll find the passages which say the Jews are a light unto the nations. Now, what does that mean? Let's take a look at light. Light on its own, well, is a very powerful thing. It's absolutely necessary. But it usually goes with as being a light. In other words, either illuminating or guiding in the midst of darkness. You can go where you want when you can see, but when there's darkness, then you have another challenge. So if we're a light into the nations, why are we lighting? What are we lighting up for them? What do we expect the result is? If you have a vehicle and you put lights on it, it can go forward. So that vehicle has an importance, has a reason, has a purpose, which needs to be recognized. So in this world, and at this time, not that it's different than any other times, but the Jews are also dependent on the kindness of the nations of the world. I mean, who liberated Europe on the, initially? I mean, almost entirely. And now we approach the United Nations, as fruitless as it's been, but it's still not a Jewish organization, and we still Jewish people, the executives are leaders are trying to influence the United Nations, and, and I say with appreciation, who can you substitute? Who can you compare to the President of the United States for channeling so many resources, his own reputation, for standing by the Jews in the land of Israel? You should be blessed, and this country should be blessed. We have a teaching in the Torah, and wherever we're living, we need to pray for the welfare of the government, in brief. So we can see that even though President Trump has a Jewish relative, a close relative, but nevertheless, he has other relatives, and he is standing there by us. So it's exemplary of the need for assistance and an alliance with the non-Jews. So who am I speaking to at this moment? I imagine maybe there's some Jews listening to this presentation and Noachites. I don't advertise it openly for Noachites only. So we both can benefit the symbiosis and to recognize. And Noachites realize that they're just not a group that gets together for prayer and philosophical discussion. And the Jews realize that these are another group of people who should be treated as bystanders and hope that they're going to learn something by osmosis. Just to emphasize the point, I mean, who, how are we going to get into, well, back, go backwards that amongst dealing with evil and anti-Semitism in the world, and fighting it, and covering it, and hopefully transforming it into evil, but even more so is the concept of prevention. And that means raising a righteous generation of all people, children of all people, where murder, theft, um, immorality that destroys families, destroys people, among other things, are emphasized, especially with the belief in God. As I mentioned before, that all the virtues in the world sooner or later can fall by the wayside. But with the belief in God and understanding a bit of God, learning about God's ways, this will substantiate the learning. So we have to raise a righteous generation. And who's going to get into the public schools? Who can get in without the media and the government without the assistance of people who are the righteous nations of the world? So I want to wish you a good weekend, a good Shabbos, and that this alliance, working alliance, has has to be fostered in both groups, each in their own way. And we should see the coming of Mashiach and the final redemption immediately. Thank you so much.